per dollar raised, the value-added tax is less destructive than the income tax. Now, why is that? Well, it's because the income tax tends to have progressive rates and VATs tend to have a flat rate. Now, of course, a lot of countries have preferential rates for some items, but let's set that aside. In theory, VATs are normally a single rate tax. And the big difference between a VAT and an income tax is that VATs don't double tax saving and investing. They're basically a consumption, as public finance economists describe it, it's a consumption-based tax. Now, in theory, you can have your income tax be a consumption-based tax. Just don't have any double taxation on interest, dividends, and capital gains. And in effect, a value-added tax would tax your income one time at one low rate when you spend it, and a consumed income tax would tax your income one time at one low rate when you earn it. But the incidence and the economic burden of a properly designed income tax and a VAT would be the same. But of course, most countries don't have a properly designed income tax. They have these income taxes with progressive tax rates, which of course create additional penalties on being productive. And they have all the double taxation on income that is saved and invested. If you look at the flat tax that we periodically have discussed in the United States, it's a consumed income tax. It is identical in terms of economic incidence to a value-added tax because it's one rate and there's no double taxation. So this gets into this very interesting political challenge in the United States. We don't have a value-added tax. We have, as we've already talked about, this ever-growing burden of government. The left in the United States, at least politically, says tax the rich, tax the rich. But everyone behind closed doors, they know that you just can't raise that much money from the rich. So the real fight, sooner or later in the United States, is going to come down to whether you do a VAT. Now,
you do have a sales tax in certain states, right?
yes, you have states with sales taxes, but the overall amount of revenue collected by sales taxes as a share of GDP is only about 1/4 of what is collected in Sweden with your value-added tax. So it's there, and in some states the sales taxes are getting close to 10%, but they also tend to only be on goods, not on services, and so they're not broad-based sales taxes. They tend to be narrowly focused sales taxes just on things you buy at a store, but of course, oftentimes they exempt food or they exempt pharmaceutical drugs or things like that. So there's all sorts of loopholes in our state sales taxes, which is why when looking at total sales tax revenue as a share of GDP, it's just not that meaningful. But here's sort of the political challenge that classical liberal free market oriented economists have to deal with. If you know taxes are going up, it will be less damaging to the economy to do a value-added tax than to do higher income tax rates. But as we've seen in Europe, if you do a value-added tax, that tends to be a money machine that politicians use to make government grow even faster. So it's sort of like, you're a condemned prisoner and you're being asked, do you want to be executed by hanging or by a firing squad? It's a terrible choice, which is why, in my mind, everything comes back to the fact that if we don't control government spending, something bad is going to happen. And by the way, even if you choose the value-added tax route and you say, oh, well, at least we won't get higher class warfare taxes on income, no, that won't work because left-wing politicians in the United States are very fixated and focused on distribution tables. So if you do a value-added tax, they'll say, oh, that's going to be proportionately a higher burden on modest income people. So to compensate when we're doing the value-added tax, we have to also increase income tax rates. So if you do a VAT, it probably actually is the excuse that politicians will use to raise income tax rates and to maybe have a higher death tax or higher capital gains tax. In other words, more double taxation of saving and investing. So I'm a very pessimistic, depressed person when I think about America's fiscal future, because as long as we keep having politicians who are big spenders, I don't see any positive outcome for tax policy, because we're going to get the class warfare taxes and we're going to get the value-added tax, and politicians are just going to continue spending.